the people.
We the people.
We the people.
We the people. Hi there, I'm Kelly Jean Kelly. We're talking today about the U.S. Constitution, and I'm actually in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where the Constitution was created in the summer of 1787. And this house was around in 1787. The word Constitution means how something is organized. And in this case, the U.S. Constitution organized the 13 states into a single national government. Now, that was not easy to do. In fact, the person who led the meeting that created the Constitution was George Washington. He said the fact that so many people from so many different parts of the country were able to come together and agree on a single system of government was a miracle.
It's really the starting point of the American government, and everything within the American government emanates from it, goes back to it, references it. Sometimes we lose sight of that, but the Constitution really remains the framework for any understanding of the U.S. government.
But why did we need a Constitution in the first place?
Around 1785, there was actually a lot of discord. The colonies were operating under what was called the Articles of Confederation. So they were sort of this loose arrangement of states, and they were tied together by this document called the Articles of Confederation. We might think of that today as like the United Nations has member states. So there isn't a whole lot of central authority there.
The states did not necessarily want strong central authority. Remember, the U.S. had just won a war of independence with Britain. They were afraid of giving a national government too much power. They did not even have a president. But the weak system was creating problems.
Ultimately, then, what happened in 1786, really, I think it was the tipping point, if you will. There was a rebellion in Massachusetts called Shays' Rebellion. Some local farmers took up arms and sort of prevented the government of Massachusetts from holding court and collecting debts, and it made people quite frightened. So, especially people who were in positions of power at that time, who worked in government at that time, were sort of afraid that they couldn't stave off this rebellion.
So several men wrote a letter to Congress asking if they could make some improvements to the government. And Congress said, yes, okay. And a few months later, delegates from the states began arriving here at the Pennsylvania courthouse to make what they thought were just going to be some changes to the Articles of Confederation. Every state sent a delegation, or group, except for Rhode Island. Let's see some of the men who were there. Their statues are at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. Mark Karras is an educator there.
Here's the president of the convention, George Washington, pretty well-known figure from history. As the president, he's responsible for overseeing the proceedings of the convention. There's James Madison. He is 5 feet 4 inches tall, the shortest member of the Constitutional Convention, but a really important figure in its proceedings because he's the one who formulates a lot of the Virginia plan that has a huge influence on the outcome of the document. So he comes into the convention with a very clear idea of what he thinks the government should look like.
All the delegates represented their own states. You can see by their body language that they spent a lot of time in the convention disagreeing with each other. But they did agree on some things. They agreed that the government should have 3 parts, a legislature, an executive, and a national court. They agreed that the national government should be able to raise money for national expenses, such as paying foreign debts. And perhaps most importantly, they agreed that the authority for the government should not come from a king, but should come from the people themselves. That idea is expressed in the first line of the Constitution, in the introduction or preamble.
What happened in Philadelphia was a revolution in constitutional thinking. They made a bunch of intellectual and philosophical leaps that transformed the nature of the Union. The first leap was to come to understand that we the people of the United States, rather than we the people of each of the several states, were sovereign.
Over the weeks of the convention, they began to see themselves as part of one nation that needed its own set of national laws. So what the delegates thought was going to be a meeting to change the Articles of Confederation became a constitutional convention. And they met here in the Assembly Room of Independence Hall, May through September. What was this room like during that time?
It must have been awfully uncomfortable because, of course, of the hot, muggy summers that Philadelphia is known to have. But certainly these men met in this room with the windows shut.
With the window shut? Why did they meet with the window shut?
Because they did not want the public to know what they were doing in this room. It was a matter of secrecy for the nation at that time.
The delegates decided to keep their discussions secret so they could speak freely and change their minds. That was an important decision because it took a long time for the delegates to reach any kind of agreement on some major issues.
But the question of how the large and small states would be represented really was the question that almost derailed the convention. Virginia came up with the aptly named Virginia Plan, which would have essentially made apportionment based on population. The smaller states like New Jersey wanted to have a guaranteed number of seats so that their interests could be represented. And like Goldilocks, the whole thing was solved by Connecticut in the Connecticut Compromise, led by Roger Sherman, which combined the two plans and created an apportionment-based popular model in the House of Representatives, and also created a Senate where each state has 2 representatives. So that was what allowed the whole thing to go forward.
The issue of slavery also threatened to break up the convention. The southern states wanted to maintain slavery. Some northern states had already started to ban it.
There was also a question of how slaves would be represented, because if the southern states get to count their slaves in the apportionment, then they will swamp the North in Congress, even though the North has many more free voting citizens.
The delegates eventually decided to count 3/5 of the slave population. And they said the U.S. government could not ban importing slaves until 1808. Historians have argued whether the original Constitution protected or helped limit slavery.
I think it punted the question of how and where it would be ended. And it was only by avoiding that question that the Constitution was able to pass. But in that sense, the seeds of the Civil War were sown at the convention itself.
Into 7 parts or articles.
When you look at what part of the Constitution gets the most words, almost half of it, 2 pages, all goes to Article 1.